Lewis, 1970s. Is that where it all started then?
Yes, 1974. I stepped onto a platform actually in the North Sea with the opportunity to do a scaffolding job. I think it was the Transworld 59 or 58. I can't remember. They were converting it. And I was asked to go out there with somebody else to price a scaffolding job that was going to be going on. My first experience was we weren't shown to the accommodation. We lived in a porter cabin on the helideck, which they were sandblasting at the time. That was my introduction to the North Sea. But I actually fell in love very quickly with something I'd never experienced before. I distinctly remember going into the galley about 5 o'clock in the morning, sat down to the first American I'd ever met in my entire life. And on one plate, he had a T-bone steak, fried eggs, ice cream, and chewing tobacco. And I'd never seen that before. And I said, what do you do out here? And he explained what he did. He said, if you're smart, you'll get into this business. So we went out there for a few days. I saw what was going on. And I said to somebody before I left, how do you get a job on an oil rig in the North Sea? They said, go and see Sedco Forex. They're bringing lots of Sedco at the time, bringing lots of rigs in. I went there, and basically the rest is history. It's been an absolutely fascinating journey. I've been in and around the business for over 50 years, and I still love it.
It's infectious, to be fair. So I can understand where you're coming from. What was life like on the rigs back in the 70s?
It's interesting when I realized we were going to be talking about it today. I was really trying to picture what it was really like. In the early days, a lot of the people were coming out of the military, so they were very, very technically competent. Mechanics, electricians, probably a few ETs, welders, pipe fitters, etc. But they all had like a professional background, a lot of them did. And they were very, very good at what they did. And then they had a lot of people who didn't even know what an oil rig was. I remember when I'm from Yorkshire, so when I told my mum and dad I'm going on an oil rig, they said, what's an oil rig? I mean, nobody had an absolute clue. But some of the things I remember was the camaraderie. Very proud of what people were doing. I mean, people didn't know what they didn't know. That was very obvious from the beginning. Unfortunately, the one thing that really got to me was to see the amount of people who were getting hurt, maimed, and killed, actually, because they just didn't know what they were doing. And Joe, I'm a little bit older than you, I'm presuming. I'm 74, so...
Yeah, just a wee bit,
Well, if you think about those days, a lot of the work was going on with decompression diving. Originally, the guys who were coming into that were from the Navy, so they knew what they were doing. But as decompression diving became more prevalent, you could go on a 6-week course in Wales and become basically a deep-sea diver. And the amount of people who actually probably passed away in the decompression chamber just from incompetence of what people were doing was frightening. And I was telling somebody the other day, I don't know how many times I sat in the galley and would be sitting with a diver and he'd be going, oh, this is my last dive. I made £35,000 last month. I'm going to do it one more time. And that was the last dive. And I kept seeing that. And even back in those days, I was always thinking, we are missing something as an industry, and I haven't put my finger on it yet. I also remember, if you've got a little bit of time, I will tell you, I was probably the most incompetent person on any rig I've ever worked on. That's the God's honest truth. I'll give you some examples. I started off as a painter. Within the first week, I knocked a tin of paint over a brand new engine. That was my painting career finished. They made me a roustabout, and during that time, they made me the official cleaner of the sack room. And anybody who's been on the 700 series rig will tell you, when they built these things, they never actually put any drains in. They had this Venturi system, which would never work. So in my genius one evening, I went and saw a welder who knew as little about the rules as I did and said, can you cut me a hole here and I can get this clean once and for all? So in the morning, I still remember him, C.L. Sims, he used to wear his hat slightly on one side, tool pusher, he comes out the office and I said, C.L., come and see, I want you to see the sack room. And it was immaculate. He said, Lewis, what did you do? I said, look, I've cut a hole and that's the North Sea. Went, oh my God, we've got to get DNV out there and everybody else. So Yesterday I was talking to a lady who's actually the chair of the Institute of Directors, wonderful human being actually called Sarah Downs, and she said, Lewis, life is a series of speed bumps, and all of these speed bumps kind of make you who you are, probably till the day you pass away. And I had my speed bumps all the way along. I mean, I could tell you stories that are quite frightening. But at the end of the day, I did about 2 years in the North Sea, finished off as a derrickman, and we finished off doing all of the tripping for a crew that had got stuck. So for 2 weeks, they did all the fishing, we did all the tripping. I was freezing cold, and I thought I've had enough of it. So I got an opportunity to go and work actually in Japan on a drill ship called the Discoverer Seven Seas, which was going to be the first drill ship that could actually maintain itself in deep water over about 6,000 feet of water. And it was the experience of a lifetime. So if I look back in the early days in the North Sea, fantastic experience, never to be forgotten. Lots of wonderful people, some even still keep in touch. And there was a real sense of positivity. And having just gone back into the North Sea, literally since last year, we started doing some work with the step changing safety people. It's come full circle, as you can well imagine. The downturn, all of the negativity about oil and gas, like somebody can turn a switch tomorrow and all of a sudden we won't need it anymore. And it's really sad to see what's happened when there's so much opportunity still out there. Having said that, if I fast forward, the people that we met, we ran the first safety leadership program for Step Change last week, along with 3 other companies. The positivity was amazing, from OIMs all the way through to operations managers. It really caught me by surprise, because I've seen a gap in between where I think some of the love of the business has gone. I don't know if that's your experience, but that's what I've been seeing.
Yeah. I hope you're enjoying the show. If you are, don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. It really helps the show. This week's episode is sponsored by V12 Footwear. V12 have released their new BOA boots, and I am a big advocate of BOA boots, as you can get them on and off quickly, especially at lunchtime and especially at the end of the shift. They're light, they're strong, and they're comfy, which is always the most important thing when you're spending 12 hours a day plus on your feet. If you're a contractor or if you are in charge of the supply chain at whatever company, I highly recommend you getting a pair of these. Back to the show. No, I know where you're coming from. I think people are also fed up as well with, we had the downturn of 2014, 15, 16, it started picking up again, 19, 20. Obviously 19 was looking good, and then obviously COVID came in 20, and that just knocked the arse out of it again. 2021, 2022, it started getting a little bit better. UK obviously was hit with IR35 for the contracting side of things, didn't do anyone much favours. And then obviously this new government came in last year, and I think, it's really kicked the arse out of it, and there has been a huge mood shift on it, which is a shame. I'm also under the impression that I think it's a bit of a phase of this demonizing until eventually, I hope it's not too late, but I feel there might be a point where someone with a bit more of a higher IQ than me that's in a governmental position turns around and goes, this isn't going to work. Like, we can't carry on the way it's going. We haven't got security over our energy, but I do think that's all unfortunately kind of rolled down towards the boys and the girls that are working offshore. And yeah, it's sad. Like we were saying before, it's sad what's going on now. It's a shame, and I hope someone with a bit of power turns around and kicks the arse up out of this Labour government and kind of gets them to shake up. But how does one go from a roustabout who says he's incompetent to an OIM?
So, incompetent with my hands, let me be very clear. I should have rephrased that to technically incompetent. But, again, over the years working in this business, I'd listened to all these people who would talk about when they got home, have these honey-do lists. I got home to a honey, this is being fixed because you're useless at fixing things. So, very, very common thread. But I had a privilege of realizing very quickly that where my technical skills weren't particularly good, I happen to have a way with people, something like yourself, I think, Joe. The way, I mean, you're obviously technically competent as well,
Oh, I don't know
but
about that.
I was always able to get on with people, and over the years, I actually moved up quite quickly because eventually, what they would do is they'd send me to any country where the rig or the people on the rig were having a problem, and I was able to kind of reset the culture. And there were some really good examples of that, actually. I'll give you one in particular. So I'd actually, just to put things in a time frame, started in 1974, went offshore in the UK for a couple of years, then went with the Seven Seas, and then started moving basically around the world. And I was actually had come back to Aberdeen, was around actually when Piper Alpha happened, which was an absolute tragedy, obviously, completely changed the industry, as you well know. And I was sitting in a leadership session actually in Aberdeen, working for Sonat. And the vice president came in and called me outside. He said, Lewis, I'd come back to the North Sea because I wanted to learn a little bit more about what they were doing on semi-submersibles, having already worked on drill ships and jack-ups. So I said, I'd like to come back, not as an OIM, but as a driller and actually do the complete well, just so I get a really good picture of every operation that's going on. And if I'm in bed, come and wake me up because I really want to see the whole thing. And towards the end of that, we went into town, we did a leadership program, and a gentleman called John Cole, who was the vice president, called me outside. He said, Lewis, would you like to go back overseas? I said, yeah, I'd love to. He said, well, can you go tomorrow? I said, well, where do you want me to go? He said, I want you to go to Indonesia. We have a rig working for Enterprise Oil, and they've just chased the OIM off the rig with a fire axe and had to escape in the lifeboat. So I said, yeah, I'll go, no problem. So I go down to Indonesia. They brought the other OIM out to replace the guy that had got chased off in the lifeboat. About 2 days while we're doing a little bit of a handover, I'm sitting in the office with this other OIM, and he's on the radio with his back to the door. And I just happened to look out the corner of my eye, and there's an Indonesian coming in with a bread knife about that long, and leaps right over the top of this OIM and tries to stab him in the heart. And luckily, the OIM had a pocket calculator in his pocket, and with it being a bread knife, which happened to be the knife the Indonesian had picked up on the way up to kill this guy, with it being a bread knife, it bent. But the OIM has got the blade hanging onto the blade, bleeding like mad, because it's gone right through his hand here. And he said, Lewis, hit him. And I'm going, I've never hit anybody in my entire life, and I'm not about to start now. So I said to the Indonesian, give me the knife. And he just flipped it over and gave me the knife. And then the OIM popped him, and down he went. So we had to fly that OIM into town to the Naval Hospital to save his hand. I called the superintendent, and I said, look, I don't know what you pay OIMs here, but at the end of the day, I am more than happy to stay, but you need to give me an opportunity to work with these people differently. And a year later, we got voted the Rig of the Year by Enterprise. And actually, I was looking the other day on LinkedIn for their drilling superintendent. It was a guy called John Ross. He actually recommended the rig then go to Premier, and they took us to Thailand. And that's kind of typical, Joe, of what I've been able to do over the years.
How important is the culture on a driller, on any, installation or vessel that's out there?
It's huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it doesn't take, it's like any organization. It's very much up to the leader, and the leader sets the culture. In fact, the other day, when we were in this step change in safety program, there was a very interesting talk by Chris, and what he was talking about. If culture's the top, below culture is very much around community. Below community is family, and below community is family, and below family is self. So if you think about it, a rig, a platform, any installation, any organization, it's a community, and it's the people that make the community, as you well know. So if the leader has a positive attitude where they want to create a community where people get on with each other, where there's an atmosphere where they'll look after each other with psychological safety, etc., then you're going to have a good working atmosphere, and typically you're going to be productive. Give you an example. So I went to Egypt for a while. 3 great stories from Egypt. Number one, I go out there for my first hitch as an OIM, spend a month on there, and Ahmed Yunus, who was my deck foreman, I've never forgotten him, and this is years ago. As I'm going off, he said, "Lewis, are you going to go to Cairo on the way home?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're going to go and see the pyramids?" I said, "Yeah, of course." He said, "Well, just remember, they were here when you got here, and they'll be here when you leave."
He's no wrong.
No, not at all. But again, I'll go back to sense of community. So, as I'll talk about in a while from a personality perspective, my E-colours are what we call yellow-red. So very people-oriented, love to be around people, which is why I'm doing this with you. And my relief was somebody who did not like people, who's technically super competent, very, very by the, this is the procedures, etc. In my office, the OIM's office, at 9 o'clock in the morning for the tea break, I'd have about 20 people in my office, all having coffee and tea together, and whatever else they serve in Egypt. And that's from there came great ideas. Egyptians, wherever they were from in the world, but that's where we brought everybody together. When my relief was on the rig, there was one cup in the office, and it was his. Nobody. Yeah. No, and so when you talk about culture, not wrong, not right, but different.
Yeah.
So literally, when I got off the helicopter coming to work, there'd be a queue of people standing outside the office who just wanted to come in and talk and brainstorm and do whatever we were doing at the time. So I think, yes, absolutely, culture plays a huge part.
I couldn't agree more. Honestly, I couldn't. I think it's so imperative, especially offshore, where, as we discussed before it came on, you're away for however many weeks at a time. You're never getting that time back. And I think if you just see it as, oh, I'm going out there to do a job and not going to make the most of it, I don't think it puts you in a great place. I think you're far less approachable because you don't really think about, your kind of mannerisms around people, which I think goes a long way because now, some of the vessels I've been on recently, the trips are 5 on, 5 off, 6 on, 6 off, and that's a long time to be away from, let's be honest, reality, because once you step onto wherever you're going, you are tucked away from everything. The realities of going on at home, because life does move on when you're not there. And I'm a massive advocate of making the absolute most when you're out there. Don't get me wrong, there's times where you're like, well, God, I can't wait to get home, kind of thing. But at the same time, I think it's so important to make the most of your time and make the most of the people around you. And if they don't want to be around you, that's absolutely fine. There'll be someone else who I'm sure you can find. But I think having that approach where just being approachable. If people are happy enough to come into an OAM's office, and it's wherever you go in the world, it's always, oh, this OAM's good, that one's an arsehole, or whatever the case. And I think if you've got the ability of, especially in a management position, for people can approach you, you get a lot more honesty out of it as well. You don't get the individuals, and they're not scared of you. They know they can be honest with you, and they'll know, all right, well, Lewis is not going to absolutely rinse my ass or run me off. He's going to work alongside me, as opposed to, I bet we better hide that hole that we've cut out of the deck because XYZ is going to go nuts, kind of thing. But yeah, no, I think it's really, really important, as we discussed before as well. But how did that kind of lead you then towards HSE?
Well, I'd always had a passion for trying to help people to be in a better position, to get home to their family in one piece. And I think it's really important what you just said, actually. So, for example, what I used to do all over the world is when I would go out on my walks, which I did a lot around the rig, I would always take different people from different departments. And I found it really interesting because they would then go back into the tea shack or wherever and say, oh, I just spent an hour with Lewis, and actually this is what he's looking at. He's looking at it through his OIM's eyes. I'm looking at it through my roustabout painter, roughneck, whatever. And all of a sudden there's a much greater understanding because you've got advocates then all over the rig, So how did I get into HSE? So working in Egypt again, we had a driller called Dave Freeman who lived in Las Vegas. And he came back to work one time with a beautiful wooden box full of different colored chips, poker chips, which they had, gifted as they were opening this new casino. And he came into my office and said, Lewis, I've got a present for you. I said, oh, thank you. What would you like me to do with this? He said, I don't know, but you'll think of something. So I get on the Gatoronic. Again, Ahmed Yunus, my deck foreman, come up to the office. I need some help. In the meantime, we had been trying to use DuPont's stop program for a long time. as a BBS program and could never really get it to work very successfully. So I said to Ahmed, look, we've got these chips here. Have you got any ideas? And I could see his eyes kind of light up. He said, give me a couple of hours. He'd gone down to the store, worked out very quickly that you could take a plastic sight glass spare from one of the oil tanks, cut these sight glasses into 12-inch lengths, and mounted about 10 of them on a board, and the chips fitted perfectly. So he comes back in the office, he said, I've got an idea. Okay, what you got? He said, you see this board? This is going to be our BBS program. And on the top of each one of these sight glass tubes, he'd written safety glasses, mask, fall protection, whatever the things you would typically look for in a BBS program, including behaviors. He said, and the way this looks is there's all different colored chips. This has nothing to do with e-colors. It's just colored chips. Mm. He said, so let's do this. We'll have a safety meeting. We'll give all the roustabouts the brown chips, 5 chips each. We'll give all the roughnecks green chips. We'll give the electricians blue chips. And everybody's got chips. And we'll call the program Akashtak, which in Arabic means gotcha. Mm. So imagine that you're walking across the deck, and for whatever reason you don't have your safety glasses on. And I go, Joe, Akashtak. And you go, oh. And you give me one of your brown chips. I write my name on the back, not yours, because it's not accusatory. I write my name. I go into the galley, which is where we mount this thing. And guess what? There is a brown chip in the tube for safety glasses. By the end of the week, virtually everybody's given up their chips for one reason or another. So it worked fantastic. Towards the end of doing this for a few months, the CEO of Sonat and the vice president came out to the rig because we were looking at putting a third mud pump on. I wasn't even on board, which made it even better. They went down into the pump room, and the vice president said to the CEO, have a look at the blueprint, because there's something not matching up with where they want the pump to go. And the vice president took his earplugs out and said, I can't hear what you're saying. This little Egyptian comes around the corner and goes, Akashtak. And he's taking chips off the CEO and the vice president, right? About a week later, I got a call and said, Lewis would like you to become part of the safety group. And in Sonat, they had what they called Offshore Safety Advisors, which just went around the world doing a month and very much, just seeing what the operations were doing. So I said, oh, you mean you want me to do a month and become an operations safety advisor? No, we want you to move to Houston and become the HSE manager for Sonat. So I moved over to Houston. My wife didn't want to come at the time. I got there on a Tuesday in 1996. And on the Wednesday morning, the president called me and he said, what are you doing on Saturday? I said, whatever you want me to do, I'm here on my own. He said, well, we're going to be buying a company called Transocean, and we have to do due diligence. I didn't even know what due diligence was. So very soon we formed an organization. Sonat became Transocean. We started working with them in Norway, which was a whole other experience with 11 rigs they had, and rigs in the UK. And then over the next 3 or 4 years, we bought Transocean, merged Equals with Sedco Forex, and then bought Redding and Bates. And we went from a culture of phenomenal safety to something that really changed my life, because in the early 2000s, we had 7 people killed from the different rigs. The gentleman who was on your program a few weeks ago, that was on the horizon, where he talked about the manager being so interested in knife safety, if you remember.
Yeah.
There was, by the way, it was interesting because he said he used to be on the Marianas. I don't know if you know the history of the Marianas, but that was the Thyros. That was actually the fire platform sitting next to the Piper Alpha.
Yeah, for Piper Alpha, yeah.
Right. But he said that, the company had this thing about knives, and he's absolutely right. Because we literally got to a point, I left in 2004, but by then, the incidents we were having in the Gulf of Mexico prior to all these mergers and acquisitions were literally just people cutting themselves basically in the Gulf of Mexico, using a knife to open a box. It was literally the only incident we were having. So I can understand a little bit about where that was coming from. But then, like I say, we got through this period of merging with these different companies. And I was really thinking about it, Joe, when I spoke this morning. I think what broke the camel's back, the hair on the camel's back for me, is we had a gentleman killed in the North Sea on one of the rigs up here, working for Transocean. And he'd actually fallen down the lift shaft with the elevator. And the response from the UK was, well, we'll write a bigger procedure. And from already having a large procedure about how to, work on an elevator, here comes another 13 pages. Yeah. And I just lost it. I said, this is not the answer. We are totally and utterly missing something. And so I decided I wanted to try and make a huge difference. We had been looking at some type of personality styles a little bit before. And then in 2002, I had a speed bump. I got to a point where for 3 or 4 years, because of all the mergers and acquisitions, I was literally HSE by night. During the day, we were running these workshops all around the world. We brought every person from the rig management to the roughnecks, to the galley hands, to the business partners, to the operators. Everybody came into 3-day workshops. And we did that for 3 or 4 years. Lived in Aberdeen for months, lived in Norway for months, all over the world. And I got completely exhausted. To a point where in 2002, we had then just bought Redding and Bates. So every time we bought another company, we trained people to come and co-deliver the new safety management system and everything else. And one day, it just all caught up with me. We just had our 7th fatality. I was lying in the bath. And I don't know, Joe, if you've talked to anybody who's ever had a near-death experience, but they'll all tell you the same thing. My heart started to race to a point where I thought I was about to die. And then literally, which is what they'll tell you, you see this white light coming towards you. And all of a sudden, you go through what's called a life review. And I'm now sitting in my garden in a pram at about 2 years old. And this happened because that happened, and this happened because that happened, and this. And you see the whole thing play out. So I jumped out the bath, went running down the corridor of the Novotel in Pau in France, looking for a friend of mine who I worked with who was a lot more religious than me, just to tell him I was right before, or he was right, just before I died. And I go crashing down onto the floor, stark naked, and fighting for breath. Actually, by that time, one of the guys who was working with me, Harvey Snowlin, he grabbed hold of my head and I can still picture my head on his knees. And as I'm fighting for breath, this voice came into my head. It's as clear as day, Joe. And the voice said, you can have another breath if you make a promise. I said, I promise to spend more time with my family, because for the last few years, I had been on the road literally nearly all the time. And then the voice came into my head again and said, you can have another breath if you make another promise. And I said, I promise to become a better listener. Because every time I get up and publicly speak, which I was doing nearly every day, oh, you're a really good speaker. The more speaking I did, the less listening. And then the voice came again and said, you can have another breath if you make another promise. I said, I promise never to have an argument again. We celebrate our 46th anniversary on Saturday. I've never had an argument with my wife, ever. She's what we call predominantly blue-green. She can argue on her own. She doesn't need me involved at all. But I used to argue on behalf of the company all the time. As you're going through these mergers and acquisitions and people are telling you this won't work and that won't work. And then the voice came one more time and said, you can have as many breaths as you like if you make one more promise. And I said, I am going to find a way to help people better communicate. About that time, the ambulance arrived, injected me, and I woke up in a French mental home. Because what had happened was I was just exhausted. I'd actually had just a panic attack. I woke up 2.5 days later with my wife standing at the end of the bed, who they'd flown in from Spain, who said in Spanish, levántate, gilipollas, no te pasa nada, which means get up, you idiot, there's nothing wrong with you. You just needed some rest. I tell you all of this to put it in perspective. So I'd also, because of all the public speaking, I had nodules on my throat. from speaking from here instead of from, the diaphragm. And not long after I got home, we went in, had the operations. I didn't even know if they were cancerous, but they took the nodules out, and they said they're not cancerous. But as they were putting me in to the operation, now the doctor said to me, "Now remember, when you wake up, you cannot speak for 10 days." And my wife looked behind me. I said, "And you can never smoke again." Oh, God. Anyhow, I come home, and I spend the next 10 days, here's another speed bump for you, where the only thing I could do was lie by the pool here at home and, with a whiteboard, "Can you make me a cup of tea?" But those 10 days were like a gift from God, because it gave me a chance to rethink about everything that I'd ever done and everything I wanted to do in the future. I was telling somebody the other day, Joe, some people will book themselves into a monastery in Thailand for 2 weeks. I had that right here. So to put things in perspective, I decided to go back to Houston to tell them that I was going to leave and I wanted to go do something else with my life. And a wonderful human being called Walter Cabuccio, who was my boss, said to me, "Louis, right now the company will do whatever you want to do because they all know what you've been through. Why don't you think about what you want to do next?" "Well, I'm going to start a coaching company." He said, "Then my suggestion is take a couple of years, it's still staying with Transocean, and go and coach the managers that we have around the world who could benefit from your people skills." So they put me through every coaching course available, which was always well appreciated. And I started to go around the world coaching the managers, which was a phenomenal experience, Joe. So that was in 2002. In 2002 and a half, there was a fatality on the Sedco Energy in Nigeria. And this was one of the Sedco rigs that they instead of having a derrick, they had a mast, because you could do 3 operations at the same time. And unfortunately, somebody got killed. So they called me and said, "Louis, would you go down there and help the OIMs, not as HSE, but as a coach, just help them through it all?" So I went out there, and I was desperately trying to understand, again, what we were missing. Why did we keep having people getting hurt, maimed, and killed? And I was sitting with the crew one night, and like I said before, we had started to dabble in personality styles before, mostly because Transocean had started to build dual-activity drill ships, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but you've got literally two
derricks, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, one massive derrick.
Yeah, but two, yeah.
Yeah, but working very closely together. So the manager, Larry McMahon, had said to me, "Louis, we have to find a way to help these people communicate, otherwise it's going to be a mess." So we started to have some form of understanding of personality. So anyhow, I'm sitting with the crew in Nigeria one night. I said, "You need to help me. I want to help you, but you need to help me to help you. What are we missing?" I said, "Let me just ask you a question. What are your strengths?" If I go around the room with the crew, what are your strengths? What are what we used to call improvement opportunities, we now call potential limited? And what are your motivations? What is motivating you to do the things that you do that could possibly get you into trouble? And Kevin Bartow, who to this day I thank mentally every day, he said, "Louis, if you're going to ask us these questions, why don't you ask us the obvious question?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "Why don't you ask us how we can get hurt?" Have you ever heard of a flat forehead moment where we've never asked that question? We've done all of this stuff over the years, provided every piece of equipment, the safety management system, you name it. But we've never asked people how they could get hurt relative to the personality. And thank goodness, the first person who answered happened to be somebody who's predominantly what we call yellow-blue. And yellow-blues tend to be very emotionally reactive. They will jump in to help without even thinking about it. And literally what this guy said, "Well, Louis, you know me. I'm predominantly yellow-blue, and I can get hurt jumping in to help." 2 years earlier, we had, unfortunately, a banksman on the Transocean Leader in the North Sea get killed. They were trying to land a basket one night, particularly bad weather. Baskets rocking like this. They've got 2 roustabouts hanging on for dear life. And this third person happens to be the banksman. He's got a nice big sign on his orange back. Banksman. You go to the procedure. Banksman, thou shalt not touch the load. But guess what?
He
This guy
touched the
happened
road.
to do. He jumps in to help, and the moment he jumped in to help, the basket swung over, caught his head between the basket and a Samson post, and left his brains all over the deck. And Joe, I sat in the fatality review in Houston and heard somebody say, "You just can't fix stupid."
Oh, fucking hell.
And that, my friend, was such an eye-opener for me. So when I'm sitting there on the rig now, asking people how they can get hurt, and they just say exactly what they just said, so my mind goes to Leader, then my mind goes to my mother, who passed away during COVID at 97 years old, who was off the chart yellow blue, who worked on a suicide line 3 nights a week because she loved to help people. Those were my first 2 data points. So then we started asking people, how could you get hurt? And to my amazement, everybody knows from a personality perspective. We've got those answers in 30 different languages, and the answers don't change. We have all kind of information on that, which I'll come to in a while. So that was my first real thought, that here we can make a difference. I went back to Houston. I told the management, we are missing something. Some of the leaders were interested. Some of them weren't so interested. They said, "Lewis, we're a drilling company. We're not psychologists." I go, "No, but there's something in this." They said, "Well, you keep going." So in 2004, after I'd been coaching more leaders around the world, I got a call one day, said, "Lewis, you need to come back to Nigeria. There's been another tragedy on the Sedco Energy." A guy had got all of his fingers chopped off one night, unfortunately, in the mast. And they typically don't fly helicopters out at night, but they did not like the look of what this guy looked like. So they decided to fly a helicopter out, picked him up, and somebody to look after him on the flight on the way in. And 7 miles from the rig, the helicopter crashed. Pilot died, co-pilot died, the guy who got hurt died, and the guy who was looking after the guy that got hurt died. So they called me and said, "Lewis, would you please go down to Nigeria?" The rig was working for Chevron. And the Chevron senior management had called Transocean and said, "I'm going to tell you right now, this rig is not going back to work until you can prove you can work incident-free for the next 3 years," which is how long the contract's got there. To bring another rig into Nigeria through the contracting process would probably have taken them a couple of years. And they were sitting on our Bami looking for first oil, so they really didn't want to stop. But I have to give Chevron their due. They shut that rig down for over a month. And while we worked with the crews to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. Okay, so we got the opportunity to really work with the crews, and that's when we decided to take things to a whole other level. And thank God, things went really well after that. So while I was out there for about 4 or 5 weeks, every week the vice president had flown down from Paris for Transocean. Let me get the timing right. So this happened in the June of 2004. In the February of 2004, we had decided, 4 of us, to start a company called Equilibria, and we're going to leave in the September. But what had happened when this incident happened in the June, the VP came down and walked me through the helideck one day. He said, "Lewis, weren't you going to start your own company?" I said, "Yeah, in September." He said, "We'll start tonight. Bring one of your other co-founders down and start working as Equilibria. And we will keep you working for the first 3 years. I promise you that." And actually, I'm going to Paris on Monday for somebody else, and I'm actually having dinner with the guy. I mean, that's the kind of relationship we have. And they were true to the word. So we started Equilibria in September, and Joe, it has been the most phenomenal experience ever since. So another speed bump, if you like. So at 52, I left Transocean. The president told me, "If you leave right now, you're leaving about $7 million on the table. But if you feel it's the right thing to do, go for it." I said, "I'm going. We are going to start Equilibria." And it has been an absolute privilege right up to this moment, including speaking to you, which I have a lot of admiration for, Joe. I'll tell you again. I think people need to hear what's going on in the world, like you say.
So Equilibria, actually, that's an interesting one. What was the immense spark though? Was it that last incident? Was that the kind of thing? Yeah, that's it. And then obviously a little bit of a persuasion by the sounds of things, and that's how the birth of Equilibria started then.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, as we were going through all these mergers and acquisitions, we would get people who came on our team to help us actually share the message with people that knew them. So, for example, from Sedco Forex, we had a guy called John Lake, who was a very respected manager. From Transocean Norway, we had a wonderful gentleman called Dagfinn Tromborg, who unfortunately passed away during COVID, and another gentleman called Paul Grant, who I'm still co-founder with, the two co-founders who are still left. But the four of us kind of left Transocean together, and we sat down on the 4th of April 2004. And actually, John had left a few weeks before we did. And when we got there, he said, I've already written the vision, which was about a page and a half long. I said, I have been coaching managers around the world for the last 2 years. And when I say to people, oh, what about Joe? Oh, lots of potential. What are we doing with that? Oh, he's got lots of potential. I said, can we not just have a vision of realizing potential? Which is what John was trying to say in this page and a half anyhow. So we came up with a vision of realizing potential. And within minutes, we came up with a one core value of people first. And that's been our mantra for the last 21 years is, as you said right at the beginning of our discussion, it's all about the people. And it always will be about the people at the end of the day. So that was the start, Joe.
Yeah, what's the colours thing then? Because obviously that you've mentioned them a few times through. What's the story behind them?
Okay, so if you look back in history, right through back to the Chinese thousands of years ago, they reckon there were 4 basic personality styles, which they recognize as earth, wind, and water. Earth, wind, fire, and water, which translates in our world into red, yellow, green, and blue. Simple as that. So we all have these 4 personality styles within us as human beings. The red in us tends to be the doer, the action-oriented side of us, and typically wants to know what. Tell me what to do or I'll tell you what to do. And you'll hear it a lot. Then there's the green in us. That's the analytical, the data-oriented side, the desire for information side of us. And that wants to know how. So the red wants to know what, the green wants to know how. The yellow in us tends to be the socializer, the engager, very much people-oriented side of it, if you like. And they want to know who. And then the blue in us tends to be the relator, the empathic, the supporter, and they want to know why. So you've been around this business for a long time. If you look at most procedures, they are written in here's what to do and here's how to do it. And there's very little emphasis on the why the being has to do it. And that's where you lose people quite quickly. So you've got red and green, green and red, who tend to be somewhat independent and task-oriented. And people who've got more of that yellow, blue, blue, yellow in them tend to be more people-oriented and interdependent. So like you were telling me before, some people become approachable. People you could talk to very easily, and other people not too interested. Obviously, there's a personality piece of that. People who are predominantly red, yellow, yellow, red tend to be fast-paced and action-oriented. And people who've got more green, blue, blue, green in them tend to be more information-oriented and steady-paced. So when a team is working well together, let's say that the leader, for example, is red-yellow, they have to be conscious of the fact that even though they don't want much information, if they're working with people who are predominantly green-blue, for example, they do need information. So if you think about toolbox talks or pre-task discussions and all of that, that's when you begin to understand the dynamic of why people pay attention, why others don't pay attention, why someone just go and do the job, whereas others are still hanging on to the information. So what we did over the years, and very pleased to have it, I think we probably have one of the biggest data lakes in the world of information. And what we have is these pocketbooks with all the information in. So, for example, if you can see this.
Yeah.
Okay, so in here, we have a couple of pages dedicated to each e-color combination. So there's red, yellow, red, green, blue, green, yellow, green, red, green, blue, etc. All right, so you've got 12 combinations. The first thing that we looked at is how could I get hurt? So we have 5 answers where people have told us, in multiple different language how they can get hurt. The next question is, what makes it difficult for me to stop the job? And Joe, this is interesting because when I was an OIM, and I'm predominantly yellow-red, never had a problem stopping the job. I didn't realize other people did. So I'd stand in front of safety meetings, pre-task talks, etc., and tell everybody, if you're not comfortable doing something, stop the job. It's okay, no problem. There's never going to be any comeback. I didn't realize how difficult that was for some people. So we looked at what makes it difficult to stop the job. Then we looked at how could I disrupt teamwork and how teamwork is disrupted for me. What makes it difficult for me to follow procedures and how to address procedural challenges. If you have these discussions prior to a task, the chances of somebody getting hurt are significantly reduced. Because if I ask you how you can get hurt on the job that we're about to do, the next obvious question is, well, how can we prevent it? And if I'm working with you, how can I help you prevent it, and vice versa? And the impact of that, Joe, was phenomenal. So everywhere we started to work in the world, we immediately saw much better results because people were that much more aware. So that was the start of the journey. To put one add-on to that, I think you maybe talk about it in a minute, but so you get a lot of knowledge about yourself. I sent you the premium report, right? So you have an opportunity to get a 33-page report, which not only describes you, but how to work with other people. But the real key came in 2008, 2009, actually working with Chevron. There was this huge effort to try and get people to stop the job, to use stop work authority, stop work responsibility, whatever you want to call it. And we saw very quickly, like I mentioned here, some people, no problem. Other people, big problem. We're never going to do it. So we decided to flip it on its head, and we developed this thing called personal intervention. Because 99% of the time, when you're asking somebody to stop the job, they know they should be doing something differently. They're just not doing it. Anything from using the trailing hand technique on the handrail to whatever they're doing. So we developed this thing called personal intervention, and there's a pause and play button on here. So I'm quite fast-paced, as you probably picked up. I like to help people. That can get me in all kinds of trouble. So what do I have to do? I have to press pause. Even today, if I'm out on a rig or a platform, even at my age, and I typically know what the person's doing, it could be something as simple as dragging a sling across the deck. My instinct is to go and help them. I'm not insured. I don't know what they're supposed to be doing. I just see somebody struggling. The natural instinct is to jump in. I have to press pause. I have to press play on being responsive rather than reactive, if that makes sense. For people who, for example, blue-green, and I'll talk about education in a minute, they typically don't like to speak up, so they need to press play. They need to get past that worry about confrontation and actually press play. They say that if you actually touch the button, it starts to open a neural pathway in your brain, and you can actually come up with a new behavior. So out of all the work we've done around e-colors over the years, this has been the game changer. We've had kids in schools who are in all kinds of trouble, be it alcoholism or drugs, and tell us, I was going to commit suicide last Saturday and decided to press my pause button. The power of this is unbelievable. But that's where we've come over the years, Joe.
No, it's really interesting, actually. One of the questions that come to mind during all this is, and obviously it might be worth looking into, how much of a impact as building a good culture around the rigs with these ideas, how much does it have on the actual production of these places in terms of, are they delivering better results? Are they delivering, X, Y, Z? Is there studies that prove that the impact is there from a better culture?
Absolutely. I'll give you a good example. Yeah. They were really struggling with two of the decommissioning jobs they were doing in Santa Barbara, in California. We were asked to go in there, and I will tell you, the culture changed. It didn't happen overnight because it takes some time, but the culture just changed everything to a point where people were just blown away by what they saw. And I've seen that in every industry we've gone into. Because at the end of the day, when you've got people understanding where other people are coming from, you're already ahead of the game. I don't have any in front of me, but actually I've got one here. You can see it. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So you put that on somebody's hard hat or whatever their e-colors is, with a little bit of education, even as they're walking towards you, you know how they can get hurt, what makes it difficult to stop the job, why they do or don't follow procedures, what disrupts teamwork for them, and a myriad of other things that they can learn very quickly. So the awareness goes up. Tolerance goes to appreciation. So instead of putting up with Joe because he doesn't do this, he doesn't do that, all of a sudden you're appreciating that he does things from a different way, and here's why. So yes, production goes up, reliability goes up, safety goes up, communication goes up, and let me add to that. About 8-9 years ago, we got approached by Chevron, who were in a bit of a quandary in California, in Bakersfield, 2 different parts of the organization. The drilling and completions were using us, Equilibria. We're all doing the e-colors. The production people were all using what they call human performance. And they brought in a human performance expert, one of the top 3 experts in the world. And a wonderful lady called Greta Leidecker, who was the vice president, said, we can't do both. We need to bring everybody together. So they asked me to meet this gentleman called Rob Fisher, who was the owner of Fisher IT, Fisher Improvement Technologies. Would you two be prepared to meet and see if we could do something together? So we met. I'll never forget it, because he came on his own. I brought 5 of my coaches with me who were all different e-color combinations. I thought we were doing human performance with the e-colors. What he was talking about was something different, but I brought the 5 coaches because I just wanted to say, his name is Rob. I said, Rob, what I want you to see is when I ask them how they can get hurt, their answers are going to be completely different, because the science of human performance assumes everybody reacts and responds the same way. So very quickly he saw that, and we formed a partnership which has taken us together all over the world. And the impact has been phenomenal. And as a matter of fact, we are about to show, we have a workshop for the Institute of Leadership in Aberdeen on the 11th of December, and we're going to show them this new technology, which is the combination of human and organizational performance and the personality diversity technology coming together with what we call AERO, which is advanced error reduction in organizations. And Joe, it's a game changer. So I'm happy and blessed to have lived long enough to see what I think is what we'll call the next logical step in what's been a long, long journey.
It's funny actually. It's not funny actually at all. I'm thinking about now. We're going into this this massive offshore wind boom, and quite a lot of the construction companies that are in it have come from a dredging background, which I don't know how much you know about dredging, but dredging's quite, should we say, an old school craft trade, should we say, and the safety factors there are not brilliant. We'll go as far as that. And now obviously these companies are kind of in the forefront of all these constructions of the offshore wind and that, and I feel that they're trying to learn as they go. And I listening to what you're saying is that with regards to Equilibria and stuff like that, I feel that would be a great avenue to go down for them to kind of approach. I'm not saying that they're terrible, because they're not. I've worked for a few of them now, but there is this difference between them and what's going on in the oil and gas. Obviously, oil and gas has a hell of a lot more to learn from in that front. But I do think that going forward with this boom that we're having in the offshore wind, I think that's something that's really needs to be more approached by these companies. And that's why, and listening to you there, you can obviously tell the reason oil and gas had to go down that road, or should be going down that road, and is because they've unfortunately had the fatalities. And I think, if anything, from what I've experienced in the wind, it's a good industry to learn off. Yeah. I'm absolutely, I'm very interested in what you're doing there, and I absolutely take my hat off to you, especially taking it towards schools as well. I mean, I could go on about the current generation till I'm blue, but I'm not going to, because this podcast would be very, very long. But one thing I ask everyone who comes on this program, well, I've changed it obviously recently, but if you look back on your career, what's your proudest moment that stood out?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. I think the proudest moment has to be the realization. Well, first of all, obviously the family. I have a phenomenal family. They're not children anymore, but my daughter and son both work with Equilibria. That's been an absolute privilege. To work with your family is phenomenal. And they both have their own strengths, they're completely different personalities. But I'm certainly very proud of them. And as a matter of fact, when I see what they're doing today, I just sit in awe. I wish I had been the father that I see my son is to my grandchildren. And I see my daughter she does phenomenal stuff that I can't even think about. But I think of all the pride, it's the fact that what we're doing is making a significant difference, Joe. And it certainly keeps me going, I can tell you. And I see so many opportunities where people, if they really took on board what we're talking about, it just makes life better for everybody, not only at work, but also at home. And like you say, in fact, just what you were saying before, when we go to do this work in December, we've got 2 days where we're going to be working in schools. Because if we start at 7 years old, so if a kid at 7 learns, and they happen to be blue-green, that rather than never put their hand up in class, they can press their play button and put their hand up. In 15 years' time later, they go into industry, and somebody says, are you comfortable stopping the job? The answer will be yes. If they don't get this, the answer will be no.
Yeah.
So imagine the impact of that.
Oh, 100%. And kids are like sponges at the end of the day, are they? So I take my hat off to you. I hope it breaks through. I think it would benefit generations to come on 110%. I'm totally on board with that one. And I will say thank you so much for coming on. It's far easier when someone says yeah early on. I do thank you for that.
It's my pleasure and my privilege. And Joe, anything I can do to help what you're doing, I like to help. So don't be afraid to refer.
No, I certainly will.